Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra daf Lamed Hey. We're going to get started at the bottom of Lamed Daled Amud Bet with the case of Zeh Omer Shel Avotai v'Zeh Omer Shel Avotai. So Ruth and Naomi each claim their land, the land is theirs, and they each inherit it from their fathers. Amar Rav Nachman called Alin Kval. So we saw this yesterday. Rav Nachman says, whoever strong wins, we leave it to Ruth and Naomi to fight it out. Umayshna, which we had a bunch of explanations, what the basis of it is, how we view this. Anyway, we're not going to get back to that. You can go back to yesterday's class for that. How is this different from a case of two documents that each claims this land was given to me as a gift, and each person has a shtar that says this land was gifted to me on this day, same date, both are signed by kosher witnesses. Now here we have a different machloket. Okay, two different opinions, neither of them match Rav Nachman's opinion. Rav says we split it 50-50 because we don't really know. And according to the Rashbam, I'll go with the Rashbam's explanation. Even if one could convince, one could prove that theirs was earlier in the day, it really doesn't matter because the ashtar, again, this is the Rashbam's approach, ashtar, not everyone agrees with him, ashtar only goes into effect, ashtar matana, on the end of that day. So it doesn't matter what time it was written, doesn't matter which one was written first. Only one of them, right? One of them overrides the other. We just don't know which one. Okay, we have no idea which one is the right one. So Rav says we split it 50-50. Shmuel Amal Shude Dedayina. Shmuel says we let the judges assess. Now the Rashbam explains what does it mean we let the judges assess. So the Rashbam says Shude Dedayina. It's about 10 lines from the top. Remember, the Rashbam is in place of Rashi here. We assess, the judges look at who are the people who got the gifts, which one is closer to the person who gave the gift, which one is it more likely they gave the gift to. According to the Rashbam, Shude Dedayina is a way that the judges come and make what we call an educated guess as to who is right. Either which way, it's not the same as Kol Dal Gvar. It's in fact the opposite because Kol Dal Gvar means the court just removes themselves entirely from the situation. Here we put the judges front and center, and even though they don't know what the truth is, they get to choose. Okay, again, according to the Rashbam, they make an educated guess. If you look in the third Tosfot on the page, Shude Dedayina, Tosfot disagrees, quotes Rabbeinu Tam, Nireh Rabbeinu Tam, L'mishi Yirtzeh Dayan Litain. Totally arbitrary. Not that the judge has the power to decide and they can figure out who it's more right to go to, but they can choose who they want to give it to. Perhaps they could choose based on who needs the money more, or they have complete discretion. He does add at the end here, Od Peresh, 3 lines from the bottom, you can't just let any judge do it. It's only an expert judge that can do the Shude Dedayina. Okay, but without getting into too much, although it's a fascinating topic, Shude Dedayina, and how does it work? But anyway, let's just go back to our main topic. Each one says the land is theirs, right? We say, Kol Dal Gvar, we leave it to you to fight it out. But if we have two documents, they each say this land was gifted to you on this day, and they disagree, either Yachloku or Shude Dedayina, but nobody says Kol Dal Gvar. So how do we come up with the difference between why is this case different than our case? To which the Gemara says, Hatam leika lemekam ala demilta. In the case of the two shtarot, we can never determine the truth. Lemekam ala demilta means we can never establish who's right. And according to the Rashbam, this is because even if one has a witness that their document was signed at 10 in the morning and the other has one that was signed 3 in the afternoon, it still won't verify the truth for us because one of them is valid, one of them is not, and it has nothing to do with what time it was written that day. They both, in fact, say the same thing, and we don't know which one is right, and we really have no way to determine. Whereas, Hacha, in our case, that's here, we can find out the truth at some point. Perhaps one of them will find the shtar that's missing, or we'll find some sort of proof, bring witnesses. So it's possible we could determine the truth, and that's why we don't split it 50-50 or give the judges the ability to decide, and we just leave it Kol Dal Gvar until maybe one side brings witnesses. Now the Gemara wants to compare to another case. We saw this above in Metzia, it's a Mishnah and Daf Kuf. If we trade a donkey for a cow, or I buy a slave woman, and the slave woman gives birth, or the cow gives birth. So the original owner who sold the cow says, oh, it gave birth before, and the vlad, the offspring, is mine. The other one says, what do you mean? It was after. And they have this disagreement about when the animal was born. And then each one claims ownership. Yachloku. So there, split 50-50. First of all, there's no debate. We'll talk about in a minute why there's no Shuddha D'Dayina here. And secondly, there's no call to Alim Gvar. Okay, the Rashbam says simply there's no Shuddha D'Dayina based on the Rashbam's interpretation of how Shuddha D'Dayina works, because it's not a gift here. It's not like we can figure out who is more likely that the person gave the gift to. Here, we have no idea if it's more likely they gave birth before or after. There's no way to determine. So there is no Shuddha D'Dayina. Again, that's the Rashbam. You have to say why, according to Tosfot, is it not? Would Shmuel not say Shuddha D'Dayina? But that's not our topic. So let's stick with our topic. The question is, why in the case of the land, Ruth and Naomi each say it was our father's land? We say we leave it to whoever's stronger. And in the case of the para, we say, no, yachloku, we split it 50-50. So the Gemara is going to make a distinction, which there's many different interpretations how to understand this. Hatam lahai itle drara de mamona, ulahu itle drara de mamona. In the case of the para, the cow, and the slave woman, well, there's drara de mamona. What is drara de mamona? You might remember we had this phrase back in Bava Metzia, and in fact, there's a whole gefet on it. Rabbi El Shimoni gave a shiur on it on Bava Metzia Daf Kuf. I recommend you go back and re-listen to it because it's a fascinating machlok, and it's good when the sugyot that we learn connect. And it's easier to understand once you've actually learned the sugyot inside, because there's a machlok at Rashi Tosfot in Bava Metzia about this, and the Rashbam is going to have a third opinion about how to understand Shuddha D'Dayina, and it's very interesting to be able to learn in depth once you've seen the sugyot all inside. So what's this drara de mamona that exists in the case of the cow and the confused, the offspring? But I'm just going to keep reading the Gemara and then we'll explain. But this one, with the land, either it's one or the others. Can't possibly be both, although we're going to see it's not necessarily both and the other either, but it's unclear. So let's try to figure out how to interpret this line, or these two lines. So the Rashbam, it's actually back on Amud Aleph, about 10, 12 lines from the bottom. Hatam gabe machlif para b'chamor l'travayu eat le'drar de mamona. So far he hasn't said anything new, but in the para, in the chamor case, in the cow case, and the slave woman, so there's drara de mamona. What does that mean? Shapara v'ashifcha, according to the Rashbam, hapara v'ashifcha shel shnehem hayta b'zeh achar zeh. It belonged at some point to the original owner, and then it belonged to the person who bought it. So each one had what we call a chazaka, had ownership over the cow at some point. Each side said, and the birth happened when it was in my domain, and each one had it in their domain. Or maybe at the exact time it was switched. Or maybe they say, it was exactly at the time when it was owned by both of us, or right as it was changing, and therefore they split it. Now, if we skip a little, but hacha in Rav Nachman, idemar lo demar, lo eta karka shel idach me'olam. We don't have any proof of ownership of either of these people in the land. So it's very different. When each one has some sort of ownership over it, they have more of a hold on it. So we'll say achloku, they split it 50-50. But when nobody has it, then we can just leave it up to chance and say kol da'alim gva. And that's the Rashbam. Tosfot on Amud Bet at the top of Lamed Amud Bet says, Perush didal tanatayu mehacha yesh safek lebeit hadin deheminayu hafevlad. Without their claim, okay, if we hadn't had a fight over when was this born, okay, they didn't come to court and argue over it, but nobody really knows. Well, that would have been a safek the court would have had to deal with in any case. It's not like a doubt that came about based on a claim. But the doubt about this field, there were two people who were claiming who the court could have thought maybe the field belongs to. They have no way of knowing it belonged to either Ruth or Naomi. Neither of them had any real chazaka on the land. So that's a claim that we only have an argument about because it was brought to the court and because each side makes a claim. That's a different kind of claim. Okay, I have to think about it, why that would be. But in the claim where there's a doubt before the court, as it is, we're going to say achlok. And the court's going to split it 50-50 between the two. When we don't even know there's a claim other than the fact that the claimants make a claim, well, the court wouldn't have even thought there was a doubt about this case. They would have no idea of knowing who, what, no one had any claim to the land. Then they just leave it called the Alin Gvar, whoever's stronger wins. That's another way of explaining Drara de Mamona. Rashi not here, because Rashi's not here, and then you have to try to think about what Rashi would say here. But Rashi and Bava Metzia, Daf Bet, and Gimel, were there about the Shnayim B'chazim B'talit. It asked there, why is it different from the Para and the Chamor case, where we say Yachloku, and in the Shnayim B'chazim B'talit, there's Yachloku with an oath. So the Gemara there says it's because there's a Drara de Mamona in the Para case, and there's not Drara de Mamona in the Talit case. So in explaining what that is, Rashi says there that there's no Drara de Mamona is a monetary loss. In the Para case, someone's going to lose. So we don't want to either say called Alin Gvar or we don't want to do that kind of thing, although there the issue is a different comparison. But there we want to do Yachloku because we want each side to at least get half so that nobody loses out. We don't want to have it that we're going to side on one side over the other. So therefore we leave it, we let them split it. Whereas, again, I'm not going to talk about the comparison there because it's getting too off topic, but it's not really, it's on topic, but we'll leave it. But here, right, so there's no, in the Talit case, they say there's no financial loss because they just found the Talit. So it's not like, oh, I lost out money. It was all, anyway, something they just found on the street. So anyway, there's a whole interesting debate what exactly Drara de Mamona is, but the main point, if we want to summarize until this point in the daf, we compared the Zeh Omer Shel Avatai, Zeh Omer Shel Avatai, where Rav Nachman says, Kol Alin Gvar, whoever stronger wins. We compared it to the two shtarot, and we said the difference is that there, we can't ever find out the truth, and here we could possibly find the truth, so therefore we just say, let's just do Kol Alin Gvar, but we don't let the court get involved because there's facts that we just don't have at our disposal yet. And what is it different from the Makli Para B'Chamor, where we say Yachloku, and that's because there's Drara de Mamona there. We don't want to kind of let one side take all of it and let the other side, lose everything in a Drara de Mamona case, either like Rashi says, financial loss, because financial loss, right? We don't want to let that happen, or, the problem is it's also could be a financial loss here, because if the land is one and not the other, so you have to figure out, how Rashi would really explain it here. It's a bit of a question. Or the Rashbam, who says that it's because each one had a chazaka, whereas in our land case, nobody had a chazaka. Or Tosfot, who said there was a suffix already to the court, as opposed to the art case where there was no suffix in front of the court. And that's the difference between that case and our case. Now we're going to continue. Amr Naharda. Naharda, they said, now if we say called the Alin Gvar, the case of the land, Ruth and Naomi are fighting, and they're fighting it out, and comes David from the shuk, and he just, random person, he just settles in the land while they're fighting it out, right? Classic. So what happens? Since anyway, Ruth and Naomi neither had a good proof that the land was theirs, and we said Kol Alin Gvar, the court just leaves. Well, if someone comes over, a third party, and takes possession of the land becomes theirs. Well, on what basis do they say this in Nahar De'an? Detane Rabbi Chia, because Rabbi Chia brought a brayta that said, Gazlan shel rabim lav shmei gazlan. If somebody steals from public property, okay, it doesn't belong to any one person, well, it's not considered a thief. It's a very difficult statement, and we're going to see a totally different interpretation of it soon. But right now, we're going to understand it in its simple reading. Well, it's not really that we don't call you a gazlan, but we can't take it away from you. Why can't we take it away from you? Because right now, David is mukhda. And if somebody wants to prove it's theirs, the burden of proof is on them. And neither Ruth nor Naomi can prove it's theirs, and therefore we leave it in David's hands. But Rav Ashi Amal Le'olam Shmei Gazlan, what are you talking about? Of course David is a thief. He had no right to that land. He had no claim on the land, nothing. Of course he's a thief. So my lo Shmei Gazlan, so how does Rav Ashi deal with that brayta that Rabbi Chia said a Gazlan of Rabim is not a Gazlan? Of course he's a Gazlan. What it means is Shaloni Tam Laheshavon. is actually saying that this line that Rav Chia said isn't that, oh, well, he's not really a thief because there's no one he really stole from. But what it means is that he actually is worse than a thief. A thief can always rectify the situation and can get atonement by returning the item. And they have to return it to the person they stole it from. If you stole something that's not clear who the owner is, you have no one to return it to. So you actually cannot fulfill the mitzvah of returning it, and you can never atone for your sin. So it's actually much worse. But of course, you have to return it. What does it mean, return here? Well, you leave the land and then leave it for Ruth and Naomi to fight it out. And that's the way Rav Ashi holds. And that's the way we poskin. Okay, moving on. Back to the first mission of our chapter. Chezkatan shalosh shanim miyom liyom. So you have 3 years, and 3 years from day to day, right? Meaning 3 complete years. You can develop what we call a chazaka. Talked about this a lot. It means you have rights to the land. And even if you don't have a document, as long as you make a legitimate, some sort of claim, it could be true that you bought the land, then, and nobody complained for the 3 years you were living there, we don't expect you to keep your star anymore. You could claim you lost it and get rights to the land. Well, Amar Rabbi Abba, idale iu gufe tzana de pere la'alter have chazaka. If I move into your land, and when I get there, you help me put some produce from the land into my basket, and you were the original owner, then immediately I have a chazaka on that land. Because what more way of showing me that you don't care that I'm living there by helping me load the produce from the field into my basket? So you don't even need 3 years in that case. But Amar Rav Zvid, so it's not exactly that. If you help me put the fruits, again, you're the original owner, you help me load up the fruits into my basket, and we say it's immediate chazaka, but not if you say that you let me come into your field because you sold me the fruits, or you let me be a sharecropper in your field, which means I get the produce, right? I maybe pay you something for it, but I get the produce, or you sold me the produce, then you're believed. And then I can't create a chazaka in 3 years. Because even though I'm using, right, then any sharecropper could basically claim, oh, I'm the owner, because look, I've been eating the produce for the last 3 years. So if you claim you sold the payroll to me, then you're believed. And then even though you helped me put the fruits in the basket, I can't claim chazaka. But with a caveat, hanimile b'toch shalosh. That's only if you complain within the first 3 years and say, we're not complaining, but you make a point of saying, this land is mine and I just let Michelle come in for the fruits. Aval la'achar shalosh lo. But if I've been living there for 3 years and you never said a word, and only after 3 years when I claim, oh, I'm the owner of the land, and you say, what are you talking about? I gave you rights to the fruits, but I only sold you the fruits. I didn't sell you the land. Well, then we don't believe you anymore. Because again, what am I left with? To say, here's my star, but I wasn't expected to keep my star anymore. So if I can't, right, I don't bring the contract anymore, well, then I have no way to prove it. That's unfair to me. So if basically what we're going to learn now is, so we'll see in a minute. Okay, let's wait till the Gemara gets there. But Amarle Rav Ashi the Rav Kahana So now Rav Ashi says to Rav Kahana, but according to this, if I really bought it for fruit, so what were you supposed to do? In other words, I'm allowed to eat the fruits for 3 years, and now I'm going to go claim that it's mine and I'll be believed. That seems unfair. I could basically take it away from you for a totally not legitimate reason. So what were you supposed to do? Well, you should have protested. In other words, now, protest normally means, and this we're going to learn in the next section, protest normally means that you say, get out of my land. What are you doing here, right? I come and live in your property, and you say, like, I'm a squatter, and you say, what are you doing in my property? Get out of here. And that would basically prevent me from creating a chazaka. In this case, the protest is a little different, because you're not saying, get out of my land. What you're saying is, you make a declaration. I want everyone to know Michelle is in my land, but that's because I gave her rights to the produce. And if you don't say that, it's your tough luck. I can then prove after 3 years and claim it as my own and say, I bought it from you. And I'll be believed because that's the way chazaka works. So your responsibility as the person who sold me the fruits to your property is that, and all the produce, is that you have to make sure within 3 years, before the 3 years are up, to make a comment about it, a public statement in front of witnesses, so that everyone knows that I was just there for payroll. And if you miss your 3 year up window, then I can prove that it's mine. Now, how do we know this? Well, de'ilo temahachi. If you don't say that, we're going to take a similar case where someone could totally take advantage. Hani mashkanta desura. If we have a mashkanta desura, okay, so Ruth lends money to Naomi, and Naomi gives Ruth her land as collateral. And Ruth eats on the land. This is a mashkanta desura. She eats every year the produce and deducts it from the amount of the loan. And let's just give a random number like 3 years. After 3 years, she tells Naomi, okay, that's what we're going to read right now. Dekatabu b'mishlan shanya elin. At the end of these years, whatever years we determine that will cover the amount of the loan, the amount of fruits, produce that Ruth will eat over the years. Tipuk ara dabalo kesef. The land will revert back to you, Naomi, because it was originally yours. After 3 years, it will revert back to you, and you'll be the owner of the land. And you'll be done with your loan because Ruth will have taken all the money that she was owed. But in this case, so Ruth is living in Naomi's land that she got as collateral for 3 years. Now, if you remember, we talked about this. Who has the document that the land was given as collateral? Ruth, the lender, okay? Now, if Ruth wants, she's living in the land, taking all the produce. If she wants, if she wants to hide the shtar mashkanta and pretend it didn't exist, rip it up, whatever she wants. Wait, are we going to say that since Ruth has the shtar mashkanta in her hands, she could just rip it up and basically say, oh, I've been living in this land for 3 years, it's mine, and never return it to Naomi. And Naomi won't have a way to prove it. And then, mitakne Rabbana, and the Gemara even, the Bach adds these words, and if you want to say, yes, she could be believed, no way, no how. Because then, mitakne Rabbana midi da'ate beli de pseida. Then the whole concept of mashkanta desura, which was a rabbinic instituted arrangement, would basically be creating a situation that the lenders could always take advantage of the borrowers and steal their land. How could that possibly be, right? And claim, oh, I've been living here for 3 years. So the only way to ensure that a mashkanta desura doesn't lead to this terrible situation, well, Naomi needs to some point during those 3 years make a public declaration that this land is my land and Ruth is on it because I gave her as collateral. And if she doesn't do that, well, then Naomi could really get messed up by Ruth. That's true. But Naomi has to protect herself. Naomi has to know the law and know that she needs to do this. Hachanami, and why did we bring this whole thing of mashkanta desura? Because we wanted to prove the same thing if you sold your land for the produce, just the produce of your land and not the land itself. Your responsibility as the owner of that land is to make sure that everybody knows. Hachanami, you need to make a public declaration in front of witnesses, and that's what public means, in front of 2 witnesses, and just say at some point during those 3 years, this land is actually mine and I only sold it for the produce. So we learned that from the mashkanta desura, because otherwise the mashkanta desura, they can always be taken advantage of. And this is the only way to protect yourself from someone taking advantage. Okay, last thing for today. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Yisrael, and we're only going to start this today. Yisrael haba machmat akum. The Jew comes down to the land, lives in this property for 3 years, and they claim they bought it from a Gentile. And the Gentile had claimed when, let's say, Ruth bought the land from a Gentile, Chris. Chris had claimed at the time when Ruth bought it, Chris was living there for 3 years, and he bought it from Naomi. Now, if Ruth is coming machmat akum, harehu ka'akum. Well, she is treated like the Gentiles. Some people say have goy written there, nochri. There's often a big change of how we treat the Gentiles, what they're called by different manuscripts of the Gemara. Mine is akum, so I'm going to read akum, which is of de kochavim umazalot, pagans. Ma akum eno chazaka ela b'shtar, just like an akum has no chazaka, only with a shtar, meaning the whole thing of 3 years doesn't apply to Gentiles. Well, Av Yisrael haba machmat akum eno chazaka ela b'shtar. Likewise, a Jew who took over land from a Gentile can't prove it by chazaka. Now, why is that? So the Rashbam goes into a big explanation in Yisrael haba machmat akum, about 10 lines from the bottom of the Rashbam. Basically, again, they said, Naomi was the owner of the field, that we know. Then the akum lived there for 3 years, and then the Jew bought it from the akum. I'm just paraphrasing, okay? Now, if the akum lived there for 3 years, that doesn't create a chazaka. Why is that? Okay, because what basically happens in this case, since the akum doesn't create a chazaka, the Gentile, and therefore Ruth can't have a chazaka on behalf of the Gentile, so Naomi could come and take that land from Ruth and say, this land is mine. And Ruth has to go back to the Gentile and say to the Gentile, hey, you told me you bought it. Prove to me that you bought it. Bring me a shtar. Now, why can't the Gentile use chazaka of 3 years? The reason is because the Rashbam says, first of all, stam akum gazlanim. Okay, the Gentiles in those days, again, the pagan were known, according to what we see here, to be thieves. Okay, this doesn't mean every Gentile is a thief, but they often seize property of Jews. So first of all, they're not believed. And if they are going to be believed that they bought the land, they have to produce a document. It doesn't help to say, oh, I lost it, because we have this assumption that they're thieves. And then we have this other thing, which is also, why can't we accept chazaka? Because what's the whole principle of chazaka? That you should have complained. Well, Naomi then should have complained the 3 years that Chris was living in the land. But Yisrael yarei limchot. But Jews are scared of the Gentiles, so they're not going to protest. And the Rashbam actually proves it from another case that's coming up about the Reish Galuta, that when also the Reish Galuta's people were scary. They had thugs that worked for them, which we've seen many times. And people were scared to protest. So they also can't create a chazaka in 3 years. So the onus is on a Gentile, and just like on the Reish Galuta, to keep their shtar. So if they don't have a shtar, then basically Naomi can claim, oh, you were living there 3 years, that's irrelevant. I didn't protest because I was scared. And you're known to be a gazlan, so you're more likely this Gentile, Chris, that he stole. And therefore, we're now going to, again, you have to take this whole thing of the Gentiles stealing in a historical context of what Gentiles were living near them, right? Obviously, all Gentiles are not considered thieves. But we did see enough stories to know that there were Gentiles who were stealing from the Jews at the time. So if, number one, they're Gazlanim. Number two, we're not trusted to be able to protest. We're not expected to protest, because therefore the fact that we didn't protest for 3 years doesn't mean anything, because we're scared of them, because also they were murderers. And, again, certain Gentiles in certain times. And therefore, there's no chazaka. So if they don't have a chazaka, then they have no rights to the land. So if Ruth bought it from the Gentile, that's not going to help her, basically. She's not going to be able to prove. And therefore, Naomi could come and say, hey, this is my land, take it from Ruth, and Ruth has to go back to the Gentile and say that the Gentile proved to me that you owned it, and if not, compensate me for my money. So that's what we saw here, which is, again, Yisrael, this is what Rav said, Yisrael Abba Machman Akum is like the Akum, that a chazaka won't help Ruth in this case. Okay, we'll get to a case where maybe it does work, and we'll talk about that next class. That's going to be Rav at the end of today's talk. So what we had today was, again, the comparison of Zeomer Shalavotai, where we say, Kol Da'al Gvar, we compared it to the case of the two shtarot, we compared it to the Machlik Parab Hamor, in both those cases, Yachloku, or perhaps in the first one also maybe Shudid Dayana. What's the difference between the cases? Then we talked about this chazaka of 3 years, and then we said, well, if the person's helping you load up fruits into your basket, then obviously they're agreeing to the fact that you own the field, unless they claim they let you go down there only for payroll, but that claim they can only make within 3 years. They can't make it after the 3 years are up, it's too late. Okay, and then we said that basically anyone who sells the field for fruit, the produce of their field, has to make sure nobody takes advantage of them. The other side doesn't claim, I have a chazaka on the land. They have to at some point say, just like in a mashkanta desura, that this land is mine, and I only sold it for the produce, or this land is mine, and it was just given to you for collateral. And if they don't say that, then really the other person can't take advantage and claim that they bought it from them and they were living there for 3 years. So macha'a, limchot, it doesn't always mean get off my land. It might mean just you're using my land and I let you, but it's because either you took it as collateral or I sold you the produce. And then we had this other thing about a Jew who buys from a Gentile cannot use a claim of chazaka, just like the Gentile can't, the Jew can't as well. With that, we finish for today's daf, and we'll continue with this tomorrow. Wishing everyone a good day.